Hey guys, it's Karalynn and welcome back to the podcast. Today we have another episode of my cheap Audible where I will read chapters of Trust Your Gut, which was my third book, and it's all about residential construction contracts. So I've read in the introduction in chapter 1. Today we're going to go over chapter 2, which is called Trust Your Gut. And this is kind of one of the big reasons why I wrote the whole book. So I'm just going to read it word for word, and then you guys can get the gist of it, just like the same if you were listening to it on Audible. So, chapter 2, Trust Your Gut. 90% of the contractors who end up in my office after getting sued tell me the same thing. I didn't like this guy from day one. I knew something was off with this couple. I felt off about this project from the start. Many contractors end up in lengthy and costly lawsuits with homeowners who they had a bad feeling about in the early stages, but they took the job anyways. In other words, they ignored their gut. This chapter is all about trusting your gut because even the best contract won't prevent you getting sued. Trusting your instincts is just as important, if not more, as your written contracts. While a contract can certainly help protect you in the court of law, it doesn't prevent lawsuits from happening in the first place. Do you know what prevents lawsuits from happening in the first place? When you listen to your gut and avoid working with troublesome clients from the start. The purpose of this chapter is to give yourself permission to trust your gut before signing a contract. When it comes to working with potential homeowners, listen to your intuition to avoid headaches during the build process and potential lawsuits from litigious-prone people. In this chapter, we'll cover some common red flags to look out for when engaging with potential clients. We'll then cover tips and strategies that will give you enough time for you to trust your gut about a new client. If only my client Mark had trusted his gut before signing on a home build project. High maintenance homeowners. In the heart of Minnesota, where pristine lakes mirror the sky, our home builder found himself meeting with a couple who wanted to build their dream house on a plot of land next to a beautiful lake. From the onset, before signing the contract, Mark sensed trouble brewing. The homeowners, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, exude an air of entitlement that made every interaction feel like a test of his patience. They were extremely high maintenance, demanding more time and attention than seemed reasonable. They insisted that Mark come to their home in person, not just once, but multiple times, to answer questions that could have easily asked over the phone. They pushed him to meet with their architect before the contract was signed, as if his expertise was theirs to command for free. And it didn't stop there. They even floated the idea of having him submit for the permit on their behalf, again without so much as a written agreement. It was clear they wanted all the benefits of his work and time without committing to anything in return. To top it off, they casually mentioned they were shopping around, talking to other contractors who, in their words, might be able to do it cheaper. This wasn't just a red flag. It was a whole parade of warning signs waving frantically in front of them. I don't have a great feeling about this, Mark thought to himself. This wasn't his first rodeo, however. Mark knew he could manage expectation and have a solid contract, even with high-maintenance homeowners. The project was big, which factored heavily in his decision to proceed. Both parties signed the contract. It didn't take long, but the Harringtons' demands escalated. They wanted more, faster, better. They complained about the noise, the trash, and the workers. They pointed out the tiniest of flaws and asked about the timeline every morning. Even though with each milestone, Mark and his team's craftsmanship was impeccable, the Harringtons' expectations knew no bounds. Eventually, Mark had enough and told Mr. and Mrs. Harrington that he was done. I quit. He had an escape clause in his contract. More on this in chapter 6. So he felt comfortable walking away from the project. For Mark, it just wasn't worth all the extra requests, the emotional toll, and the extra time it took to manage their every need. He was over it. To his surprise, the Harringtons pled for him to say, "We're sorry," they said. "We'll lay off. We really appreciate the work and we'll make less of a fuss about everything." The project was close to completion, just had some landscaping to finish, and Mark thought about those final payments on such a big project. He accepted their apology and gave them a second chance. He decided to stick it out to the end. And then the hammer fell, a lawsuit. The Harringtons had accused Mark of subpar landscaping, demanding $80,000. Damn it, he said to me. I should have listened to my gut. You should have, indeed, I said. In the end, Mark settled paying half of the sum to avoid a lengthy court process. He wanted to officially close this project and move on, vowing to never ignore his gut again. Red flags. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington were overly demanding before the contract was signed, which was a red flag for Mark, but he decided to ignore his gut and continue working with this troublesome couple anyways. The following represents some common red flags you should look out for. These warning signs can help you avoid costly mistakes down the line. 1. The homeowner presents you with their own contract. No one knows your business or your expertise better than you do. In no way would it be appropriate for the client to expect you to sign a building contract that they, the non-expert, give to you. Please say no. 2. The homeowner wants to change the contract after it's been signed. I encountered this situation with a contractor, we'll call him Hugo, where he had a signed contract with a homeowner who paid the deposit. Everything seemed to be on track for the work to begin, but on the day the project was set to start, the client dropped a bombshell. We're not going to pay you up front before each milestone. I'll pay you once the work is completed instead. This was contrary to the agreed upon terms set out in the already signed contract. Hugo called me from the homeowner's front yard and said, "What should I do?" he asked. I advised him honestly. The client isn't honoring the contract he signed, so you have two choices: accept his new terms or walk away. Hugo decided to walk away, a wise move. The homeowner eventually hired someone else, and Hugo avoided a potential nightmare. Because his contract stipulated that deposits were non-refundable, Hugo retained the $10,000 deposit that the homeowner paid to start the project. If a client wants to rewrite your contract or change it after it's been signed, that's a red flag. In Hugo's case, because his payment terms were different in his contract and the homeowner wanted to change the terms afterward, he walked away from the project with no issues. More on payment terms in Chapter 7. Number 3, a homeowner tries to beat you down on price. This behavior reveals their attitude toward your work, which means they don't value you. Again, you are the expert in your work and you know what things cost, so stick to your numbers. I'd also like to add that consistency sets the tone for your working relationship with each homeowner. Deviating from your numbers could make it appear that you are indecisive or that you're overcharging. The thought for the homeowner then becomes, if he overcharged me here and lower the cost for me, that means he's overcharging everywhere and I need to fight for a lower cost everywhere. You can imagine the fun you'd have with dealing with this client on your project. If a client tries to beat you down on price by showing you the price he was quoted from another builder, that's a red flag. I would also tell the homeowner to go with that builder then. Number 4, they treat you like the mere help and not an expert. Too often, homeowners view contractors as mere help, an extension of the tools that they wield. In this skewed perspective, the value of your expertise, your sweat, and your craftsmanship diminishes. It will also show up in the way they treat you throughout the entire project. You deserve better. Recognize your worth. You're more than a tool. You're an expert in your field. Homeowners should see you for what you are, a partner. If they don't, move on. Number 5, homeowner is overly demanding and you have not agreed to do the work for them yet. The Harringtons were pushy and expected Mark to do a lot before he even signed the contract, far more than what any reasonable homeowner would ask. They treated the pre-contract phase as though Mark was already on their payroll, pushing him to meet with their architect for design decisions, answer endless rounds of questions in person, and provide detailed input on their project timeline. They even floated the audacious request for Mark to begin the permitting application process before anything was finalized, as if his time and expertise came with no strings attached. It became increasingly clear they wanted him to invest significant effort up front without offering any assurance they would ultimately choose him for the job. For Mark, it felt less like securing a potential client and more like being strung along as their unpaid consultant. Over-demanding clients usually have unrealistic expectations and they are hard to please. Pushiness from clients is often a sign that they don't trust your expertise, perhaps thinking they can do it better. These are all red flags. For contractors, first impressions matter. It's like going on a date with someone for the first time. If you're already sensing unattractive qualities, these qualities aren't going to go away. In fact, they usually get worse. Some projects, like ill-fated romances, don't improve with time. If you're seeing behavior problems from the homeowners before the contract's even signed, I would not take on the project. Number 6, a homeowner asks you not to pull permits. If a homeowner asks you not to pull a permit, don't listen to them. This is a huge red flag. Even if you get along with a client, even if you want to be a good sport, even if you need the money, they're asking you to do something that puts your license on the line. Don't do it. Number 7, a homeowner wants to change your process. On occasion, some homeowners are bold enough to try and change your process to suit them. As the expert you are, you should be very wary when this happens and look at the request with keen eyes. If the request change enhances your process, then it's surely something for you to mull over and decide later. But if it doesn't, then push back on the request and stick to your tried and true process. If you do change a process for a client, be sure to cover your ass and update your contract to reflect the new change. A client of mine failed to do this and learned this lesson the hard way. Summit Ridge Homes, a seasoned company that builds homes, decided not only to ignore their gut, but also to go completely off the process for the homeowner. As you'd expect, things did not end well. As a home builder, Summit Ridge Homes' business model is based on the homeowner picking out the design for their home and then leaving it to Summit Ridge to do all the work building it. Their making decisions includes language like from the biggest decisions to the small details. Our specialists offer you the freedom to personalize floor plans, finish work, and colors so you can build the home that is unique to your family. One homeowner, we'll call him Nathaniel, decided to take this marketing message to the next level. He wanted the freedom to hire subcontractors directly. Nathaniel had friends in the field and wanted to hire them to build his dream home. Gary, who I represent in this case, typically worked as the construction manager for Summit Ridge and their projects. With their typical process, Gary oversaw every aspect of home construction. After receiving Nathaniel's request, however, Gary wanted to live up to Summit Ridge Home's marketing promise, so he agreed to give Nathaniel the freedom to personalize his home build experience. Instead of Gary hiring subcontractors per Permit Ridge standards policy and procedures, Nathaniel would hire them and then pay them directly. Gary unfortunately did not update the contract to detail this change in procedure. Gary still acted like the construction manager, but without a construction manager contract. While Nathaniel hired subs and paid them, Gary still managed the symphony of builders, electricians, and plumbers and made sure the build was on track. Throughout the process, Nathaniel paid the sub directly, bypassing the traditional channels, which went well until the roof job. The roofer's work fell short of Nathaniel's expectation. The roof sagged in one area and rain tiptoed through the gaps. Nathaniel was displeased and withheld payment. But here's the twist. Gary had hired the roofer, albeit informally. His name graced the roofer's contract. You hired them, Nathaniel declared, so you pay them. Gary and Summit Ridge found themselves facing a $30,000 lawsuit. In their defense, we tried to explain that we were merely the construction manager and not the payer of the subs, as requested by the homeowner. The absence of a formal contract detailing the agreement with the homeowner, however, left Gary and Summit Ridge vulnerable. This case went to court, and the judge weighed the evidence, the unsigned contract, the unpaid roofer, and the tangled web of responsibility. In the end, justice tilted toward the homeowner. Summit Ridge, despite its noble intentions, had to pay. Summit Ridge had a strict process in place, and they should have stuck to it. Nathaniel asking to go off process should have been a red flag. If they stuck to their process, they could have avoided the entire debacle. Tips and strategy. While you want to avoid the red flags, here's some tips for uncovering them. Number 1, meet both spouses. When working on a project involving a home by a married couple, it is essential to meet both spouses. Here's why. First, marital issues can impact the project. If there's a couple who's going through difficulties, it might affect their decision-making or communication during the process. By meeting both parties, you can gain insight into their relationship dynamic, allowing you to navigate potential challenges more effectively. Secondly, even if there's no immediate issue, involving both spouses from the start is crucial. Sometimes one spouse may not be initially engaged in the project, but they might later express dissatisfaction or surprise if they're left out of the loop. Ensuring both are informed and on board helps prevent misunderstandings down the line. Meeting both spouses provides valuable context and helps establish clear communication throughout the project. 2, introduce a design contract first. When advising sizable remodelers or new home builders, I recommend a strategic approach, requiring a design contract first, followed by a build contract. This dual-step process serves two critical purposes. First, it ensures fair compensation for the work performed even at this stage. As contractors, many of you invest a significant amount of time and effort in design and pre-planning, hoping to secure the actual job. Unfortunately, you go unpaid for these early and time-consuming stages. This design contracts allows you to get paid for your time. More on this in Chapter 4. Secondly, it allows you to collaborate closely with the homeowner or homeowners to give you a sense of who they are before you sign the build contract. Having a design contract allows you to test the waters with the client's personality. How will you work together? What's the dynamic like during meetings and designing and engineers? How responsive are they? How many revisions did they ask for? Were they pleasant or pushy? By the end of this phase, you can deliver what the client paid for and either part ways amicably or seamlessly transition to the build contract. If compatibility issues arise during this initial stage, you can reconsider moving forward even if you need the work. This approach saves you from costly missteps down the road. In other words, this process allows you enough time for you to trust your gut. 3, don't sign a build contract until the permits are approved. Taking a step further, I also recommend securing permits before transitioning into the build stage. Why? Because until you have a permit in hand, you don't truly know what the job entails. Sure, you may have an agreed set of design planned, but then the permitting process often changes them. Because each of these stages can be stressful, the design iterations, responsiveness, and sometimes lengthy permitting timeline, they give you a glimpse of how your client will behave during the building phase, which usually lasts much longer and entails more contact. How patient are they? Do they understand the process when you explain it to them? By factoring permit approval into the process, you'll mitigate the risk and see if you truly want to work with this client. This strategy allows enough time for you to see if the client is a good fit or not. If you don't enjoy working with this homeowner during this phase, you don't have to continue to work with them. Number 4, don't override your gut because you need the money. Try not to override your gut feeling because money is tight and you need a project. I know financial stresses squeeze us mentally, making us more agreeable to clients because we feel like we need the money. If you're seeing red flags with a potential client and you absolutely need the job, then it's imperative for you to double down on managing expectations, covering your ass, and having a well-written contract with all the provisions we're about to cover in the chapters that follow. All right, key takeaways from this chapter. Trust your gut. If the client doesn't feel like a good fit, don't move forward. If things are shaky in the beginning, they won't get better throughout the project. If you see red flags, either don't take the job or manage expectations extra well. Don't ignore your gut. Don't be the 90% of my clients who ignored their gut, took the job, and then ended up paying for it down the line after all the work had already been done. Mark could have avoided a $40,000 settlement by not taking Mr. and Mrs. Harrington on as clients in the first place. They were overly demanding before the contract signed, a red flag. Additionally, Mark could have walked away when he first grew tired of their behavior with his escape clause, but then suckered back in again. He ignored his gut twice. Similarly, if Gary from Summit Ridge Homes saw Nathaniel's request to hire subs on his own as a red flag, he could have stuck to their tried and true process and could have avoided their judgment in the court to pay the roofer. Keep an eye out for those red flags and be empowered to say no or even fire clients if they don't value you and your expertise. As I mentioned in Chapter 1, you don't have to make contracts language complicated. In fact, the more straightforward, the better. More on this in the next chapter.